Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bar Raiser podcast. Here we talk about technology, entrepreneurship, building products, building great teams. I'm your host, Avinash Saxena, co-founder of Bar Raiser. We are at a mission of standardizing interviewing and so helping companies hire best talents, also help people, help candidates land or join the team they aspire to, become part of. Today we have with us Priya Gupta, our tech leader. She has been super achiever in her life. Did her undergrads from IIT, went to MIT for her masters, was very early member in Coursera's team, then joined Google. Now she's part of Tensorflow team at Google. Welcome, Priya. Please tell something about yourself and maybe something you're working on these days.
Sure. Hi, Avinash. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure. So yeah, just a little bit about what I've been up to, in the last few years. Right now, I'm working at Google, and I work in the TensorFlow team. TensorFlow, for those who haven't heard about it, it's an open source machine learning framework, and it's used extensively inside Google as well as outside. Within TensorFlow, I'm currently managing this team called the product called TensorFlow Extended. So it's this ML platform built on top of TensorFlow, and it lets you build end-to-end ML pipelines for large-scale machine learning. And before, so I just started in this role about a couple of weeks ago, and before that, I was managing distributed TensorFlow. So this is when you want to use TensorFlow to scale up your machine learning training to large clusters. So I've been Google about 3-4 years, and before that, I was working at Coursera, which is an edtech startup. And there I was building the course platform backend, and then I was leading the growth discovery team for a year and a half. And yeah, then I joined TensorFlow. So that's just a little bit about myself.
It must be very early days in Coursera, right?
Yeah, I was only, I think, about 45 people when I started.
Oh,
It was in 2013.
oh, great. Great. So having built multiple and multiple tech teams leading them, how do you think companies can attract good tech talent? What is the secret sauce of building a great tech team?
Yes, sure. So I mean, I've kind of been on both sides, right? Like being hired as a candidate and hiring as a manager. So I think there's a lot that goes into it. So I'd call out a few things. I think one thing is that you want to be very clear what your requirements are, right? So I think one good strategy that Google I've seen adopt successfully is to hire like generalists, right? Really strong generalists, especially for junior levels. Like you don't really need somebody who's like expert in JavaScript if you want to build fun. Like you can hire somebody who's solid and then they can learn on the job. So I would say that's one good thing companies can do to expand their talent pool, right? And then
Right.
people will grow into their roles. So for instance, even in TensorFlow, like we hire engineers from all backgrounds, and most of them don't have background in ML. I myself did not have any background in machine learning, right? But yeah, it's a great team. Second thing I would say is culture. Building a great culture is so important these days, especially if you want to hire the top talent, right? And culture can mean a lot of things, so you have to define for yourself, for your company, what it is. But be sure to hire candidates that will thrive in your culture. So, for instance, like one of some of the things that I value in a culture in a company that I would like to work on is transparency and openness, right? Sharing as much as you can. Another one I would say is just in terms of the hiring process itself, like have a rigorous but pleasant hiring experience, because it's not just the interview. You are not just the only one interviewing the candidate, but they're also interviewing you, right? So you want to be respectful, be collaborative, always leave them with time for questions to ask about your company and culture. Interviews are sort of a reflection of your company, right? So yeah, those are some of the things. I think another point that's close to my heart is like building diverse teams. I think oftentimes you would see like a lot of teams are just made up of people from the same background, everything same, right? Went to the same school. But I think a lot of the best ideas come when you have diverse teams, because then you don't have this group thinking, right? Like everyone's thinking the same way. Um, yeah, so I would say those are some of the things companies can do to attract good talent.
Uh, I think we will come on to diversity a little bit later, but can you a little bit focus on different kind of career path that you have seen people adopt?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can talk about myself, right? Like for example, started at Google actually originally, and I was working in ads, and I was doing backend work, I think, and then a bit of front end as well. So I was, using JavaScript and C++ there. And then I, wanted to work in a startup and kind of see, how that is different than working in a big company. So I went to Coursera, and there I, completely different programming language, Scala. Um, and then worked on the backend for the course platform. And then I switched into management there because that was like another thing that I hadn't tried before, and I wanted to see how different that is from being an IC. So I tried that. Then, I was about 4 or 5 years later, I wanted to, again, try something new. And as everybody knows, machine learning is, pretty, it's like kind of blowing up, right? So I wanted to try to see if I can learn something in this space. And TensorFlow was a great fit because it's both systems and machine learning. And so I could contribute from day one, right? Even though I didn't have any machine learning background. And then yeah, ML World lives in Python, so there I was doing Python. So yeah, I think I personally have had like tried a lot of different things, gone back and forth from being management and being an IC. Yeah.
Do you think it kind of helps to add variety to your, career and, helps you learn a lot of different skills and maybe somewhere they come together as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think there is so much happening so rapidly, especially in the tech world, right? I think technologies themselves are evolving, and we have new technologies coming in every day, as well as like the fields in which it's being applied to is expanding every day. So I think skills where you kind of have multiple facets, right? Like those those people can add a lot of value. For example, like you could be a great front end expert, but if you don't know anything about backend, then it might be a little hard to kind of put things together and make sure some project is like working end to end. And so yeah, I would say definitely. I think over a period of time, of course, it's not like at the same time you want to do everything, but over a period of time, it definitely helps to add kind of this breadth to your skill set.
So you have worked on in Google at multiple teams as well as you have worked in early days of Coursera, right? How do you think hiring or building team is or joining a team is kind of different in bigger organization or bigger team versus a smaller organization or smaller team?
Yeah, so I think it can be quite different. I think some of the fundamentals, of course, are the same, but just because of the fact that a big company has a lot of people to set up a whole process, right? So it tends to be easier a little bit because you have this whole kind of recruiting force behind you. The processes are very standardized. You'll get a lot of incoming candidates. Um, at startups, I think most startups initially at least don't have the time and resources to invest in building a whole process. So as a manager, hiring manager, you probably have to do a lot more work to yourself attract candidates, kind of reach out in your network, and so on. So that's some of the differences. I think another difference I've seen is it tends to be easier to hire more junior people in startups than senior. Yeah.
Okay. Any experiences that you see, in which uh, the kind of hiring process was different uh, in the companies or the skills they were looking for were different?
Yeah, so the processes like from within Coursera and Google have been quite different. Within Google, like I said, it's a very standardized hiring process. Like you're not really interviewing for a particular team usually. You're just interviewing in general. The people who are going to interview you are from everywhere in the company. And then kind of more towards the end of the hiring process, you will talk to a few teams and figure out, okay, which teams are you interested in? In companies in Coursera for sure, and I think in a lot of other startups that I have interviewed at or talked to, it's quite different. You're usually interviewing for a particular team, and then the people who are interviewing you are from that particular team. So it's much more focused. You can there's I think pros and cons, right? Like some people like the latter experience better. Some people like more general process better. Yeah.
Great. So So Priya, after hiring, while you're building team, it's what makes a team click? How teams get innovative, or how engineering really leads into development. Uh, how do you measure that? Can you give some insights in that?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a lot that goes into building like effective and happy teams. I think a lot of it boils down to setting the right culture and processes. I think where innovation can thrive. So, for example, I would say autonomy is one of the big things, right? In my experience, both as an engineer as well as building teams, I think autonomy is really important in the whole end-to-end life cycle, right? So it's not just that, okay, of course, you have the freedom to decide how you're going to technically design it, but I think starting from like ideation to like kind of planning the whole process, prioritization, figuring out how the part is going to look, all those things. I think when engineers are kind of part of the whole process, they tend to feel a lot more, I guess, motivation and responsibility, sort of, right? So, for example, one of the very fun experiences we had at Coursera was this thing called Design Sprint. I don't know if you've heard of this. So
Mhm.
it's like this week-long process where designers in our team kind of led the entire team, the entire cross-functional team, right? So engineers, product managers, designers, research, UX researchers, through this week-long sprint where we kind of went from like just ideation, brainstorming to sort of prototyping in some fashion, and then testing the hypothesis. So like a whole sort of research process, and that was really empowering, I think, as well as fun. So that's one thing. I think another point would be another thing you could do is kind of encourage people on your team to read about the latest developments in their field, right? Not just within the company but outside. Maybe have a reading group of some kind, or like engage in meetups and meet other engineers working on similar fields outside, and kind of bring those technologies inside. Um, yeah, I think some of the other examples, you probably heard of is having some idea of like a 20% time, for example, right? Where uh, engineers can kind of spend some portion of their time in trying out new things, because, otherwise there's no time for like those things, because you always have things to deliver, always have like deadlines to meet, right? Hackathons is another great idea that a lot of companies successfully use to bring innovation.
This 20% time, we all have heard about it. Quite looks many a time looks very difficult to religiously implement. How to do it as in because in while building things, it's very difficult to prioritize on that, and sometimes it just slips out.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely hard, and I think even Google is one of the companies that really pioneered this, and I think especially as the companies become larger, becomes harder and harder. I think at this point, yeah, I think not a lot of people like kind of religiously follow this. I would say if this is something important to you and the company, then you kind of have to institute something. It can be a 20% project, but if that seems too much, then maybe like I mentioned, hackathons. So for example, one thing we did at Coursera, which was really successful, was this thing called Makeathons, which is sort of like hackathons, except that we wanted to be inclusive of everyone on the company, not just engineers. So we called it Makeathon, and people could just form these cross-functional teams and work on, they could work on standard product type ideas, but they could also just work on something else, like to improve the culture of the company, right? Some organize some fun event, and we had some great ideas come from that too. For example, Coursera for refugees. I don't know if you've heard about this program where we partnered with some agencies to provide free content on Coursera for refugees. So that's another thing you could try. I think there's lots of different ways to do it. I think like 20% project, like you said, I think can be difficult depending on what stage of the company it is, and what are your other priorities. And if it's like a make or break situation, then you might have to put a pause on it for some time.
Yes. So, yeah, these days, particularly in last 2 years with COVID coming in, I think there is some fundamental change that has happened. Particularly with people working remotely, teams, trying to collaborate as much as they can, and kind of getting forced into it, right? Have you, felt something similar, managing a team there? Uh,
Do you mean like how things have changed based on this
yes,
remote?
yes.
Like what's
Also, how things have changed and how teams are, building around it and, building for it in
Mhm,
future, I think.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's definitely a sea change. Like I couldn't have predicted, this 2 years ago. Like Google is pretty flexible. You can work from home if you have something to take care of, but like uh, by and large, there wasn't a lot of people working remotely all the time, for example, or
Mhm.
so I think, and now it's like, we're going to, when we go back to work, it's going to be a hybrid model. So everybody comes in only 3 days a week and goes home 2 days a week. So I think it's definitely, cut short a lot of these things that could have taken like 10 years to happen, but they're just happening now. I think in terms of work itself, there's, I think, pros and cons. I think meetings, for example, I feel that they've become remote first, right? Like everybody is remote, so there isn't. So previously, if you have headquarters right somewhere, and then you have a few remote teams elsewhere, or somebody's working from home, it was always that those people were slightly at a disadvantage because the main action was happening there, and it was kind of
Right.
you had to remind people to there's people on the VC, we need to make
Yeah.
sure we meet with
Yes.
them.
Yes.
And now everybody's on a VC, right? So it sort of democratized the whole thing, I think, and which is, I think, a great development. And um, I think it gives everyone sort of, similar chance to speak up. Um, uh, so that's, I think, one thing that has happened that's really good. I think in terms of what's been hard, in my experience, is like, we're missing those hallway conversations, where, you're not really talking about work, but, maybe you're talking about some adjacent topics and some new idea comes in, right? And, or like just being able to resolve quick things by like, just collect a group of 3, 4 people and just like hash out something very quickly. Whiteboarding is really hard. I know companies are working on different technologies, but I
Right.
don't think it's still there, right, to replicate the real experience. And some of these basically informal stuff has kind of been hard. Um, with social connection, I think, at work, right? Obviously, you're colleagues, but you're still to some extent have this social interaction, which helps people build these relationships that make them work
Right.
better together. And that's been really hard to replicate as well.
And do you think this, as in hybrid, when things get hybrid, will it go back to as prior, or there's a permanent change now that has happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think fully remote. I think definitely a lot more companies will be open to being fully remote now. So that's one thing. Um, I don't. It doesn't look like big companies like Google and Facebook are going to go fully remote, but uh, they're definitely very open now to having people just work remotely individually if they want to. Like previously, it was pretty hard. I think you had to have a very good reason why you just wanted to work from somewhere else. So yeah, I think it's definitely. I mean, things will go back in the sense like a lot of people will start going back to work, maybe only half the week. Uh, which is a big change, I think, honestly, right? Previously, it was like, if you had any chores to do during the week, it was kind of you have to like step out of the office and it's just a lot more work. If you have some things you want to take care of at home, it's just much easier that way. So I think some things will go back, but I think there's a lot of change that will stay.
Great. So you have been building, TensorFlow platform. Do you see any very interesting use cases coming out of it? People using it in very interesting ways.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, machine learning, like, as you know, is sort of penetrating every field now. And TensorFlow has seen really good adoption in, obviously it's within Google and a lot of other companies outside Google. And just, a lot of people trying out different things, learning, a couple of use cases that I would talk about. They're pretty cool. One of them was done last year. It's called the Sounds of India project.
Okay.
So it was done by some people at Google in collaboration with the government of India for last year's Independence Day. And so the project was basically that you would sing the national anthem and into your phone, just in the browser, and it would then convert that into sound of a traditional musical instrument like a shehnai or bansuri, and then you can like save it or share it. And then in the end, I think they also collected a lot of these people singing national anthem and made one single video out of it. So that was really cool. I think it was a great way to kind of celebrate the Independence Day, and it was built using this project called Magenta, which is a project built on top of TensorFlow, which is all focused on these creative experiences, how you can use machine learning to expand in the creative field like arts and music. So yeah, I think that was a pretty cool project. Another one was done by these students in Delhi, engineering students, and they built this app called Air Cognizer, which is an Android app, and it can. The goal was basically to detect the AQI using pictures from your smartphone. So they would basically they trained a model on the cloud, but then you can download it on your phone as part of the app, and it would, as you take a picture, it would do the inference on your phone using TF Lite and determine the level of pollution. So that was very cool, as
and very relevant to Delhi as well, because
right,
air quality,
exactly.
I think, as a lot of people say, you can see air in Delhi at some point.
Yeah, so that's another very cool project that I've seen come across. Yeah.
Great. So, Priya, what do you think? How future looks like in the world of AI and ML, and what new things are going to happen? What can you predict?
I don't know if I can so much as predict, but I can talk about what I wish.
Sure.
So in terms of the field, I think there's two parts. I see it in two parts. Like one is like the technology itself, right? What is going to happen? What sort of models we're going to see, or what kind of how are we going to be doing this? The other part is I think where is it going to be applied, right? So definitely, I think in the second part, I think there's a lot already, in terms of the technology that's already there, but there's a lot of fields that are still unexplored, and where, like this air pollution example, right? Like before hearing it, I wouldn't have thought of this, but I think there's like millions of ideas like this, where we can apply the technologies that we already exist, right? We just need to
Right.
apply them. I think the challenges there often come in terms of like the data collection. Like, do you have enough data, or how do you really frame the problem to apply a particular ML technique? So I think a lot is going to happen in that. Like, healthcare is my favorite example. I think there's some stuff that's starting to happen. One of the cool, another use case to talk about, I think Google a few years ago, and some teams in Google Brain built this technology to detect retinopathy using pictures of the eye. And this is
Okay.
something that would without using AI or ML would take like a lot of time, because each doctor's like looking at each image, and then it can probably delay the whole process of treatment. And so they, with this technology, you can just do it much faster, scale it up, and being able to also detect it much sooner, just because you don't need a doctor in the picture. So yeah, I think healthcare, there's a lot that can happen. There is legal, for example. We have so much legal records that could
Right.
be digitized, and we could
Mhm.
glean a lot of system from them. So yeah, that's in terms of use cases. I feel like there's a lot
Right.
that's going to expand. In terms of the technology itself, also I think there's still a lot to we can do a lot now, but I think there's still a lot to. The current trend seems to be, at least from my vantage point, being in Google, seeing what's happening around here. I think the trend is like towards bigger and bigger models using lots more and more data. So, for example, the field of NLP, natural language processing, is exploding right now,
Right.
where we have these giant models like BERT and GPT and G Shard coming in, and
Yeah.
they're just cracking NLP problems like we hadn't seen for a while. So I think that's one trend that will probably continue for some time. I think it'll probably expand to other areas and so on. In terms of other areas, I would say, like, again, this is where it kind of blends my prediction into more like a wish list, I would say. I think a lot of these ML models are kind of black boxes, right? So explainability is one field, I think, where hopefully we'll have a lot of growth, where we should be able to explain, like, why did this model make a decision this way, right? And a lot of people are already started working on it, but I think there's a long way to go. I think another one is, like I said, I think the trend right now is more and more data, right? But how can we learn from smaller amounts of data, right? Um, so that's another area I think that hopefully we'll see more research in, where we don't always need like tons of data, because that sort of can limit, which fields you can go into. Text is great, because you have so much text to learn from, but for other things, it can be harder. A couple of other areas I think that should hopefully grow in the future is, I would say, like mobile devices, right? On-device machine learning. Right now, a lot of the machine learning still happens in the server side on the cloud, but the trend is definitely towards shifting more and more. Also, A, to give like a much faster user experience, and B, um, to be able to preserve privacy of the data, right? As you know, privacy of data is a big issue now. So
Right.
privacy preserving ML, I think, is going to be another big area.
It's going to be a big area. And with so much happening, what do you think, are, top 3 or 4 skills that anyone, in this tech space must have or should build in themselves?
Yeah, definitely. I think and a little bit goes back to what we were discussing earlier, where things are changing so fast. You can't just say like, okay, I learned this, 10 years ago, and I'm just going to continue using it. So I think adaptability, or sort of being able to learn new things quickly, is going to be, I feel, the topmost thing, right? The pace of innovation is going to continue to increase. So like I was saying, for example, in my career, I started with, in terms of just programming language, I started with with JavaScript and C++, then went to Scala, and now Python, and who knows in 2 years what I'll be working in. So I would say adaptability is super important. Be open to learning new things. Develop that skill of being able to learn fast. Um, so that's one thing I would say. Another thing I think, also kind of related to what we were talking about earlier, is intersectionality of skills. So, if you have good breadth, then I think you can crack problems that other people who only have like one area of skills cannot. So, one common one, which is, I think now at this point common, is like ML background and engineering background, right? Because a lot of ML is being applied into engineering problems. But there's also other, areas like, as we were talking about healthcare, somebody who has a good healthcare background, but can also do maybe machine learning, or maybe can do software engineering, right? These kind of things will become, I think, super valuable, right? And it will give you an edge over other people. Um, let's see. I think another one would be, yeah. So these are, talking about traditionally when we think of skills, right? All those things. I think another thing in my experience is actually not really a technical skill, but more of you could call it a soft skill, but like being able to execute, right? I think that's something also I would hope that tech people kind of keep on their minds, because ultimately you have to deliver a project, right? Ultimately you have to deliver something. So being able to work together with other people, especially with, like, this increasing remote work, how do you plan, how do you execute, how do you keep on top of things, how do you prioritize, those kind of execution skills, I think are something that you should probably actively learn as well.
Do you think now that we are not working together always, the importance of communication, particularly written documentation, has increased many folds?
Yeah, definitely. I think, and again, like, that's, I guess, another thing that is actually good about it, right? Because I think different people like to communicate differently, and I think writing sort of kind of equalizes. Also, like, if somebody's it doesn't happen to be in the office that day and missed a conversation, right? They will just miss out. So yeah, I think it's definitely increased. In Google, I think there was already a lot of focus, maybe because we already had some remote teams that we used to work with,
Mhm.
but yeah, it's definitely increased manyfold now. And I think the collaborative doc software and those are catching up.
Right. We are hearing a lot of people, not able to now distinguish clear line between when they are working, when they are at home, when when they are working for office, when they are working for home, and all those lines are also, people somehow we need to learn that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's like a double-edged sword sort of I feel because on the one hand I really like the flexibility, right? Like, hey, okay, it's lunchtime, I can go have lunch with my family, right? I'm at home. But yeah, on the other hand, it's like okay, 8 o'clock, I'm maybe still working sometimes. So yeah, it's kind of you get the flexibility, but yeah, it can also come with like you don't have that 9 to 5 anymore. So you kind of yourself have to institute some sort of boundaries. So if that's hurting your work-life balance.
More like self-discipline
Yeah.
in a way. Great. So I think we come to a very important question, right? And it has been asked many a times, but we see very few, women tech leaders. Also, diversity in tech teams somehow is not so much. You touched about that a little bit while ago, but how? What do you think about it? As in, is it getting better? Have you observed in you know companies or technology teams around you?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's pretty still pretty bad, both in terms of women and other kinds of diversity of like background and so on. Yeah, I mean, starting from like school, it's like always sort of somewhere between 10 to 20%, I would say. So it's still quite bad, I would say, compared to where it should be, right? Like 50-50 at least if you're just talking about
Mhm.
gender. um, it's getting better, I think, in some ways at least. Like for instance, I think in my undergrad, when I went to undergrad, it was about 10% women. I think in our whole like in the whole engineering, and probably similar in computer science. And I believe, for example, in Stanford, I think now it's last year was about 35% women in computer science. So
Wow.
it's getting better, I think, at like yeah entry levels. I think, and similarly, I think related to that, entry level jobs. I think the ratios are getting better in my experience, just in the last few years, right, in just last 10 years. But I think at seniors levels, it's still pretty low. And yeah, we can chat about what are some of the factors leading to that. But it's I guess it's a cycle, right? I think if you see fewer women in senior roles, then it's more likely maybe that you don't see a path for yourself, or like make it more likely for you to drop out. And maybe lack of role models. So I think that having more women at senior level will take more time, but hopefully we're on some good trajectory.
You think anything as an ecosystem or as a society we can do to accelerate this, or help women, or help diversity in general to increase in the
Mhm.
company, or even at
Yeah,
the
I mean,
higher
I think
levels?
right. Yeah, I think there's a lot, that everyone can do. So I think there's things you can do as an individual, in your personal life as well as in your office. Things we can do as a society, things we can do as companies, right? So there's a lot for sure. Just to give, some examples. As an individual, I think, in your personal life, make sure that you're being a good role model, right, to kids around you. If you have kids or kids, if you're in your family, encourage them to explore their interests irrespective of their gender, right? Provide them with the same voice. Let them watch the same things on TV. I'm just seeing like kids around me grow up, kids, friends, kids, and so on, and it's amazing how quickly they realize what they should be interested in, what they shouldn't be interested in. I'm a girl, so I'm going to do this. So that kind of stuff, right? If you're in tech, then maybe mentor somebody, right? You can. whatever you're passionate about, right? Like I think you can kind of help somebody grow in that in their career, and having a mentor helps a lot, right? Or better yet, you can be a sponsor, you can advocate for them, you can refer them to jobs that you know about, right? As a lot of people get hired through referrals, and that can actually, like, that's why I don't advocate that as so much as a hiring thing, because I think that leads to like having teams with the same and structure, same people from the same background,
Right.
and also disadvantages people who may not be in the network, right? As a society, I think again, there's a lot we can do. um, for instance, we should improve our school system so that all the kids have the same opportunity, and providing as much as we can in the school, because kids are coming from different backgrounds and they may not have the same facilities at home. So providing, for example, talking about like programming, providing those computers and computer classes in school can go a long way, right? In getting more girls interested in programming, and also being able to do it because they may not have a computer at home. Um, and don't have separate types of subjects for girls and boys, right? Don't have home science for girls and computers for boys, right? I was watching this movie the other day. What's his name? Uh, Dolly Kitty or Chamakte Sitare or something.
Right.
And there was a scene where the point of it was slightly different, but still, like, there was this kid, right, a boy who, uh, and they're taking the kids on a school trip, on a field trip, and he and his mom get onto the bus, and then the bus has only girls. And then the teacher is like, "Oh, you're in the wrong bus. The girls' bus is supposed to be. This is the girls' bus, and that's a different bus for boys." And he's like, "No, but I want to go to the doll museum." And the girls' bus was going to the doll museum, and the boys' bus was going to the rail museum. And
Mm-hmm.
like, what is this? Like, why is this happening in this day and age, right? So yeah, we need to stop doing that, right? So it starts from the beginning. It starts from very early on. And then as companies, right, as we're part of companies, as you guys are building companies, I think there's a lot you can do. I think part A is in terms of your hiring practices, right? Try to have fair and equitable hiring processes. Make sure you're looking everywhere, right? Not just in your networks. Look at places where you don't already have people from. Make sure your processes are as bias free as possible. I think it's hard, but I think there's a lot that can be done, and that's something that I think some of the big companies have tried doing, right? Making the processes more fair and equitable. Like that's one thing. I think the other thing is retention. Like I was saying, one of the reasons I think we don't have a lot of senior women is a lot of them end up dropping out at different stages
Yeah.
of their career, and there's a lot of reasons for that, right?
Mm.
I think there's a lot of like unconscious bias all of us have, women included, right? Where uh, if you don't see that many women, then you get treated differently. So try to institute processes in your company that will kind of try to counter that. So
Mm.
think about fairness and equity in your promotion process, in how you allocate projects across
Mm.
people. Build a culture that values everyone's contributions, right? And another important thing that's super important, is to make it possible for people to report unwanted behavior, right? And actually act on those when you get those reports. I think
Right.
some of these things, right? Another thing is towards like work-life balance, right? I think the reality still is that women have to bear a lot of burden of work at home, right? Of child
Mm.
rearing and just keeping the home running. And so see how you can help them and support them in that. Maybe provide some kind of childcare support, or don't just reward people for working all the time, right? Because there's some people will have those limitation of how many hours they can work. So see how you can have a work-life balance for everyone. um,
Mm.
yeah, those are some of the ideas. I think there's a lot, obviously, that can be done.
Great. It's almost time, Priya. I'm sure you're going to be role model for so many, young girls who would like to build a career in technology and then become, technology leaders coming. And no, not just girls, everyone, boys and girls included. And Before we end it, this is a quick, rapid fire round for you, and ask you a quick set of quick questions, and then would love to hear your views on those. So, so first of all which one is your favorite movie?
Favorite movie? That's hard. I watch a lot of movies. I think one of the movies that I can't forget is Mr. and Mrs. Iyer. I don't know if you've
Okay.
seen it.
Yes,
It's been a while. Yeah.
it's a very good movie. And what has been your mantra for life?
Mantra for life. I would say optimism. I think glass is half full is how I like to look at things.
Great. And any decision frameworks that you have followed in your life, taking difficult decisions?
I think one of the frameworks I really like is regret minimization, right? Think about what, so this is like you project yourself in the future and think about like most, what would you regret the least doing, right? And, or like what would you regret not doing, sort of, right?
Mhm.
So think about it from that perspective.
Any favorite books?
Books, yeah, that's a tough question too. I read this really good book a couple of years ago. It's called Homegoing by Gyasi.
Okay.
I really loved it. It was a good mix of kind of a story, but also teaching you a lot of history along the way.
Great. Any vacation you remember? Any vacation destination?
Yeah, I think my favorite one would be Machu Picchu in Peru.
Okay.
There's this
Nice.
3-4 day hike I can do. It's beautiful.
Great. Great. That's it. Thank you, Priya, for taking out time, joining us for this discussion. It was a very insightful discussion. I hope a lot of our audience will love to hear, and then lot to act also on the discussions we had. So great. Thanks a lot once again.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you, Avinash. It was a lot of fun chatting. And thank you for having me here. I hope I could shed some light on some important topics.
Thank you. So, guys, this is it. This was our third podcast from the Bharat Razor podcast series. Look forward for the next podcast. We'll have some fun discussions with another personalities. Thank you.